Hello, this is Gabriel Custodiet of Watchman Privacy. Listen, I know why you're here. You're looking to escape the technocratic apparatuses that you see slowly enveloping you and restraining your freedom. In that case, the best thing you can do before listening to this episode is to visit escapethetechnocracy.com to purchase my privacy course on getting off the grid. This course is for everyone. It's the best privacy tutorial on the internet, and our shop has other things as well, books and toolkits and consulting, and we accept Monero and actual privacy throughout the checkout process. I do not take sponsors. I'm not part of a company. I don't have someone to answer to. So unlike 99.9% of the people who talk about their subject, you can know that I'm pursuing the unmitigated truth as I see it. Go support you and me at escapethetechnocracy.com. Welcome to Watchman Privacy. This is Gabriel Custodiet. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Erik Voorhees. He is the co-founder of Venice AI. This is the topic of this particular episode. He's also an OG Bitcoin investor, creator. He created Satoshi Dice, which I think at one point had kind of half of the transactions in Bitcoin. Shapeshift, which was a crypto exchange that wasn't requesting a lot of KYC information, which was awesome. Also a very thoughtful, thinker on freedom, free markets, all that good stuff. In other words, he thinks coercion is not a good course of action. Imagine that. And, I found this funny, Mr. Voorhees, that you had this public spat with Sam Bankman-Fried, and you had this debate about whether crypto exchanges whether there should be more or less regulation. It turns out that there's no correlation between government regulation and morality. And I think there might be a kind of an inverse correlation. Mr. Voorhees, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm doing great.
Absolutely. So since Mr. Voorhees is all in on Venice AI right now, kind of wants to restrict the conversation to that particular topic. And I just want to say for the audience who've heard kind of my adversarial take on AI, that I guess I flipped a switch recently where I said, hey, obviously this is not going anywhere. I'm not in favor of government regulating this out of existence. So this is going to be with us, and we may as well do it the right way. We may as well understand it. My colleague and I are creating a course tentatively called the Anti-Technocracy AI course, where we show people all the good stuff about you understanding the tools, using the tools, obviously with privacy, trying to get some uncensored tools. That's a big problem. Doing this in a more self-sovereign way. So that's kind of my position at the moment, trying to understand the tools. And of course, we found Venice AI in the process. And Venice AI it's a AI tool. It does text, it does images, it does code. So kind of the big three things that you'll find ChatGPT doing. And the promises of Venice AI are you can access it via Tor. You can use it without an account, including image generation, at least for the moment. You have access to an uncensored AI, which is a big deal. We're going to talk about all these things. Your prompts are hidden from the service itself via encryption. Okay, so in my understanding, it's only exposed at the moment that it hits the GPU that is processing this transaction in that particular instance. So Venice is really only getting your IP address. So obviously use a VPN, your email. I tried to use a disposable email that was not accepted, and they accept Bitcoin as payment. So when they do it via BTC Pay, which is respected because there's a lot of other fraudulent ways of doing Bitcoin transactions, let's just say. So Mr. Voorhees, very happy to talk to you. Let's start with privacy first with Venice AI. That's a big sell of Venice AI. With ChatGPT, with Claude, with Bing, the Microsoft AI, we're just using these tools if we are, and we don't really know where those inputs go. The files that, if we're foolish enough to attach to these services, we have no clue what is happening to those.
Well, yeah, we do know where these things are going. It's all going to those companies. That is the data collection. So whenever you type anything over to ChatGPT, OpenAI has your entire chat history, what the AI said back to you, what you said to it, any files that you put in there. What they then do with that stuff is a secondary question, but they have it, and they will have it forever. And so if you're okay with your information being held forever by another company, then there's really no need to worry about the privacy because they will tell you that they will be careful with your data. But the only way to really keep people safe is to not take their data in the first place. So that's how Venice is architected. And I think where this gets people, I think, analyze it on the superficial level, which is like, oh, well, do I trust OpenAI or not? And that's not really the point. The point is like you need to trust not only OpenAI, but any party that might have access to OpenAI's systems forever. And that could include any particular person within OpenAI, right? So do you trust every person in the organization? It can include any outside adversary, like some kind of hacker, right? Do you trust every potential hacker from now until the future? And do you trust every government that simply needs to write a letter to OpenAI to say, hey, hand us the accounts of this person, tell us everything that they've done? Of course, OpenAI will comply. So that's the danger. That's the risk. And if you're just asking ChatGPT like, hey, what's the history of the Roman Church, and it answers you once, like that's pretty benign. But if you're uploading your medical records or your financial information, or you're asking controversial questions, imagine this was all existing during like the COVID era. You were asking questions about vaccine safety or efficacy. It doesn't take much to realize that like these systems can become very Orwellian and dystopian. And that's what Venice is set up to be an antidote to.
Absolutely. Certainly agree with that. I think Andreas Antonopoulos has a really good quotation about what he calls centralized systems. And he says they have to have perfect security. None of them has ever managed to do that. All of these companies involved in this brave new business as usual space have been hacked, breached, leaked, whistleblown a dozen times. They can't keep information secure. No one can. And that's where we, of course, get to encryption. Have there been any scandals that you're aware of, Erik, regarding the misuse or mishandling of data as it pertains to AI companies?
There have been, I think, some breaches and security issues at OpenAI. You don't really know like what you don't know or what's not reported. But while you can only speculate on those breaches, you can also just watch what they actually do. Like a month or two ago, OpenAI brought in an ex-NSA member to the board of OpenAI. So like there's literally NSA people sitting on the board of OpenAI. So it's like you don't need to speculate on kind of what's going on behind the scenes. You can just see what's going on right in front of the stage.
And one thing I like about Venice AI is that when you visit the website, and you can visit it via Tor, you can just get started. In fact, it doesn't even have a kind of a payment screen that's thrust in your face. You really encourage people to test it out, and you can do so with an account or without an account. And so you can use it in that way. And of course, if you pay, it's $49 per year at the moment, and you can upgrade and get access to some of the better models, the better AI models, and obviously support the company. And they accept Bitcoin, as I said. So maybe you could, and go into it as high level as you want, Erik. How does Venice AI architect itself so that it is not gaining access to your prompts and the data that you're feeding it?
Yeah. So the way that every normal AI service works is you send in your prompt. The prompt goes to the company. It's stored forever, attached to your ID, all your account information, all your payment information, all the responses, and they collect that in the warehouse persistently. In Venice's case, when you send in a prompt, that prompt is sent through an encrypted proxy that goes directly to a decentralized GPU. On that GPU is the AI model that's running, and it calculates its response and sends it back through the same encrypted proxy. And then the response comes back into your browser. Your browser then is the only place that stores anything persistently. So your browser knows what your prompt was, and it knows what the response is, and that's all just held in the browser. If you clear your cache in your browser, or you switch to a different computer, you cannot see the same information from before. It's just localized to your browser. So the crucial point here is like Venice never holds or keeps any of the prompt or response information from any of your discussions.
Yeah, that is a good way of doing things, certainly. Do you have any plans to have that process audited, or are there any other kind of things we could point people towards as a way of ensuring that the system that you've architected is as it says it is?
Yeah, great question. So our longer term plan is that we don't really want to fuss around with audits, because then you're just trusting an auditor. We think a much better way is like kind of a crypto native way of just showing through open source software and the encryption, browser side encryption, where you can get back a response and you can prove it algorithmically through the encryption. So we don't have that today, but that's the like longer term goal that we would like to get to. The negative of that is that it will take longer to get the responses back because it's going through like different layers of encryption. But I think especially for anyone that has like a particularly sensitive message, the ability to like opt into that mode or not at your leisure within Venice is probably the right way to handle it. We want to be able to prove it through that open encryption standard rather than just any kind of audit or trustworthiness.
Obviously, I don't want to, we're not going to hold you to any of this, but you can use things like ChatGPT without an account. You can use Venice without an account. Is that something that you see lasting for a while? Obviously, I imagine it can't last forever. Is that a feature that you think will be with us for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I can see some people, maybe they want to support the service, so they just have an account they pay for, but they also just kind of use it anonymously, so to speak, without their account, just for the more paranoid folks among us. Let me ask a general question here, Erik. What does Venice, the city, the concept, what does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, so Venice. Well, first of all, I wanted a brand that brought some like humanity back into this world of technology. Everything related to AI, so like digital and computers and tech and stuff. And I wanted to allude back to a time of just more pure humanity. And so Venice was a city state that existed in an amazing way for 1,000 years, that basically stood up to all the empires that were surrounding it, and it remained independent. It remained powerful. It was a city of trade. It was a city of art, a city of culture. While it certainly was not perfect, I think it represented an interesting counterexample to the large empires that had existed back in that time. So, just as a sort of symbol of resistance to empire, and as a very interesting, from a perspective of cultural and humanity perspective, I like the idea. And Venice is just, of course, a beautiful city. So recommend everyone visit at least once in their lives.
I'm looking at Venice AI right now, and I have settings. Basically, if you're going through the more uncensored models, let's say, you tend to be able to select your model. So if I select my model here on Venice AI, it's not one model. I have different options. I can pick some of these. People will be familiar with Noose or Hermes or Llama, a dolphin. And these are basically different models of AI. And I can select which one I would like to use. And so Venice is essentially, I guess, piggybacking off of those already established models. Just maybe explain for people who aren't quite familiar how this exactly works and what Venice is, what Venice AI is utilizing to create its own kind of private uncensored service.
Yeah, so like if you use ChatGPT, you're interacting with the OpenAI model behind the scenes, and it's closed source. It's they're kind of amalgamation of one or several models behind the scenes, and that's what you're interacting with. In Venice's case, we don't build models. We're not developing any models. We simply take the best open source models that are currently on the market, and we offer a handful of those to our users at any given time. They all have different trade-offs. Some of them are faster. Some of them are more intelligent. Some of them are more uncensored. Some of them are better at like logical work for coding, something like that. So we don't want to overwhelm people with 100 different choices, but we curate it down to some of the best ones, and we're frequently rotating into new ones as they come out.
And then from a kind of a system standpoint, I wonder if you could just explain a little bit. Let's say somebody's using Llama. What happens? We have the prompt. We put it into the Venice website. When you type in the prompt, what exactly is the trajectory of that prompt, kind of the systems underneath, to the point where it spits back out a response?
Yeah, so that prompt is then encrypted in the browser and sent through a proxy server. The proxy server routes it to one of the decentralized GPUs running the specific model you've chosen. Basically, depending on which model you use, it's going to one of the GPUs hosting that specific model. The GPU then does all the computation and spits back out an answer, which is streamed to you in reverse through that same proxy server back to your browser. And then it's only persisting there in the browser once you receive it back.
And then one of the main reasons why something like Venice AI can exist, because in my understanding, you're not training necessarily your own AI models, is that we have these open source models like Llama. How important are these open source models? And can you imagine a future where these are no longer made open source? What do you imagine as the trajectory of, let's say, quote unquote off-brand versions of AI that are open source and therefore available to the freedom seekers out there?
Yeah, so there are thousands of open source models. They range in all different sizes and they're coming out periodically from different places. But the best ones tend to be the ones derived from what Meta, the large company, has been putting out in open sourcing. So their most recent flagship large model is Llama 3, now Llama 3.2. And they just released this open source. So open source means you can see all the weights of the parameters within the model, and it means that you can change the parameters, tune it, like build off of it, all those kind of things. So Meta deserves a huge amount of credit and goodwill for doing this. People can speculate about why they're doing it. Maybe they're just trying to help humanity. Maybe they're trying to undercut their other tech company competitors. It's probably some complicated combination of many explanations, but the fact is that they've been putting out these amazing models. And they will be putting out a Llama 4 at some point next year, I believe. Then a lot of different places will take those big models and tune them in various ways. So News Research is one of the best places that's taking these models and then fine-tuning them. And what you end up with are models that are now competitive and sometimes even better than the models that you get from the big AI companies. 2 years ago, that was like a preposterous idea. 2 years ago, the open source models were far inferior to what OpenAI was putting out. And even though OpenAI's models have gotten tremendously better in 2 years, the open source models have caught up, and they're now roughly in the same ballpark. So that's excellent. You don't need to actually go through one of these AI companies in order to get really leading edge, cutting edge intelligent machine intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say to the audience and to you, Erik, that it's always a pleasure to be able to speak directly to the founders or the co-founders. There's a lot of companies out there that have a whole PR system, and these are usually the ones you don't want to be talking to. So definitely respect for that. Let's just talk about the phone version real quick.
Yeah, so it's super simple. Basically, if you visit Venice.ai on your phone, if you're on an iPhone, just use Safari, go to Venice.ai, and it'll pop up and say, download this to your home screen. It will then download the app onto your home screen just directly from the website, and it'll act just like any other app on your home screen. So once you do that, it'll look and feel exactly like a normal app. But by doing it that way, we sidestep the Apple App Store, and we sidestep any and all of their rules and regulations today, and we sidestep any and all of their rules and regulations tomorrow or next year. So we're building Venice to be permissionless and permissive. And so we can't design it such that we have to be, burdened by Apple's terms of service. So that's why we made that decision.
Oh, I love it. I kind of suspected that might be the case. Well, I think my first thought was, hey, they just haven't developed the app yet. Then I realized, hey, that's not realistic. They're probably trying to sidestep some of the ridiculous, nonsense that Apple and Google, especially Apple, have regarding the apps that can be downloaded. Apple really is this walled garden. Not a fan of them whatsoever. Maybe we can move on to the censorship aspect. So we have the privacy aspect. We also have the censorship aspect. I was reading ChatGPT's website, and they were talking about how this is from their website, right? We spent 6 months iteratively aligning GPT-4 using lessons from our adversarial testing program. They talk about how they have their best results for factuality, steerability, refusal to go outside of our guardrails. They brag about how it's 82% less likely to respond to requests for disallowed content, right? And so they're bragging about all these types of censorship, essentially, that they've put into their models. It's a little bit complicated here, Erik, because there's censorship on different levels, right? There's censorship within the model, maybe within the training data, and of course within the prompts, where if you go to ChatGPT and you type in something naughty, it will just say, hey, that's not allowed. Maybe it's reporting your account or something. Maybe you could just dig into some of the layers of censorship that exist in some of these big tech platforms.
Yeah, great question. I think anyone who's used ChatGPT has come across times where they felt that the answers were being censored and or they were being spoken down to in kind of a paternalistic way, oh, you shouldn't ask that, or you can't talk about that, or here's how we think you should think about this thing. I think adults in a free society should be able to communicate freely. That kind of makes me like a radical these days, but it's something I hold to be important. I think just as any two people can sit in a room with each other and have a discussion about any topic, and that's permitted and that's important, and I hope we never live in a world where we can't, no matter how vile the topic is. Right? People should always be able to sit and talk with each other. Speech is never violence. Speech is never harm. And the moment you start constraining speech, you start walking down a very dangerous road. The AI services that people are used to censor things in various ways. The models themselves are biased and censored, but that's a difficult thing to define, because like you can't train a model without bias, because you have to select what data goes into the model. So, that doesn't mean you're being nefarious. It doesn't mean you're trying to sculpt public opinion into some ideology. It just means like you have to make this engineering and design decisions about the data that you put into a model and how you train it. As a human, you make those subjective decisions. So all AI models have to be subjective, and they have certain biases in certain ways, and that's okay. Like what's important is that people can make different models and have different forms of bias, and that the open marketplace of competition between models is where you get truth. So what I wanted to avoid when building Venice was a world in which everyone gets their answers from one large monolithic AI company, which obviously would become a puppet of the government or of several governments. And then, truth becomes capital T, true, that is approved by the Ministry of Truth, and people questioning it get in trouble. That's extremely scary, should frighten any good person. And the way you do that is not by trying to define what truth is, or trying to regulate truth, or trying to put out rules that the AI company must do this or can't do that. The way you handle that risk is you permit the flourishing of competition. Different models, different forms of biases, different alignment among different groups of people. That is how you protect against that kind of Orwellian future. That's what Venice does. We have several different models. Again, each model has its own biases within it. Some of them are more censored than others. We don't add any censorship to the models ourselves. So all the models on Venice will feel more permissive than what you get with a ChatGPT, but some of them are more permissive than others, and people can just kind of play around with it and see what they prefer. So that's the way we think about it.
There was a situation, I think was it Google's image generator, AI image generator? It kind of went viral. If you typed in Viking, it would create a black Viking, right? Which is, I guess you could call it, if you wanted to, you could call it cultural appropriation, you could call it offensive, but more reasonably, it is just historically inaccurate. What was what was going on in that case regarding, let's say, bias or censorship?
So I don't know specifically what led to that specific anecdote, but it certainly went viral, and it was just such a preposterous example. Likely, and I'm speculating, but likely what's going on is that in their rule sets of their AI, they imbue biases, like they tell the model, make the characters, of minority skin colors more frequently. And who knows how they're wording it, but suggestions like that into the model then cause the statistical calculator to spit out things that are influenced in that direction. So you could get an image where before it would have made normal white-skinned Vikings. Now it makes the black-skinned Vikings. It's probably something like that which occurred in that case. And even though that was an isolated incident, like this stuff is totally prevalent. Like another good example of this that we like to highlight with Venice is, like, if you go to ChatGPT or Midjourney or any of the main like image generation AI companies, and you try to generate an image of Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, the one we like to do is Donald Trump and Kamala Harris having tea, which is obviously a perfectly benign concept. No one should take offense to it. It's just like cute and endearing. And yet none of those companies will allow you to make that image. They'll simply refuse. Something's very weird with that. And at Venice, you can just type in that prompt and you'll get an image back of Trump and Harris having tea. We figure people should just, have the ability to draw what they want to draw. And we're not afraid of that freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And companies like Midjourney, which is one of the big image generation, specifically image generation services. As you said, you can't do politicians, you can't do violence and sexual things. And look, I mean, most of the movies we watch have gun violence in them, right? So it's a perfectly normal thing for people to be seeing these and maybe want to be generating something like this as well. So there's a lot of paternalism. And of course, if you type in something, it just says, "Hey, this has been flagged for moderation." Very paternalistic worldview, and then you could get a strike for doing these kind of things. So it's pretty silly stuff. I think my audience will recognize that immediately. When you uncensor a model, Erik, does that make things faster for the AI to process or slower in some cases?
Well, yeah, and to be clear, we're not uncensoring things. We're just not censoring them. So we're permitting the base model to be itself. Actually, that's not entirely true. We do provide what's called a system prompt, which is like the instructions that we send into the model to like help make it better than it might otherwise be. And our system prompt is pretty simple. It basically says like, be helpful to the user, answer directly. Don't refuse the question, be concise. Don't worry about offending people, like some suggestions like that. So we do influence a little bit in that way, but we allow the user to actually change that system prompt if they want, which is something wholly unique to Venice. But yeah, does it allow the generation to be faster? Yeah, like response doesn't have to go through a bunch of filters. The prompt doesn't have to go through a bunch of filters. So yeah, it can totally speed up the answer. And like, yes, some of the models within Venice, you can definitely get back answers that are substantially faster than you would through a ChatGPT, even though, that's a $100 billion company and they have, far vaster hardware resources than we do.
Do you have any thoughts on some of the other uncensored, shall we say, or just neutral models out there? I think, for example, don't know if you want to comment on, but Gab AI is one of them.
I'm not sure what model Gab is using. Like if it's a closed source or proprietary model. I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah, I mean, what any of these companies should do if they're saying that they're, uncensored is at least be publishing what model they're using, right? And maybe it's their own internal proprietary one, but then that just means that their model's not open source. So we like only permit open source models on Venice, and each model that's in the website, we provide a link to its Hugging Face site. Hugging Face is like, basically the GitHub of AI models. So people who are technically inclined can actually go see the model themselves, see precisely what version it is, download it, like tweak it, all that they want.
And maybe we could ruminate on this question of safety. I push back against safety all the time. I call it the cult of safety, that safety is the end goal of everything, COVID, whatever it is. And of course, safety is, in my view, the most dangerous word of all. But if you read some of these big tech AI companies, they talk about, oh yeah, we need a safe model. Like, first of all, who are you to determine what is safe? And is safety, quote unquote, safety actually a good thing? I'm just curious if you maybe rubbed elbows or spent any time with this kind of milieu of people, these sorts of people, and what you think their worldview is, where it's all about safety and how maybe that's kind of a misguided approach.
Yeah. Great question. So I think this starts from AI scaring people, right? Like, and we've all grown up with exposure to sci-fi stories of the Terminators and the HALs, these like AI systems that like take over and control humanity and enslave us. So there's a fear of AI. In part, it's because people don't understand AI, including the AI researchers. Like, no one actually understands fully how these models can do what they do. So there's a fear that humans always have of things that are unknown. And so I think from that reaction, the companies that are trying to build AI products are trying to combat that fear with an overemphasis on how safe they are. And so they put a lot of time and attention into saying, like, we're safe, our AI is safe, here's all the reasons it's safe, here's all the resources we're spending to making it safe. And on the surface level, that's comforting, and you say, okay, well, I'm glad they're taking safety seriously. But what does that actually mean? What are they doing? And what it means is often that they are censoring things and putting up all sorts of paternalistic blockings on things. And I will say stuff that it's not protecting from like the super intelligence that is taking over the world and enslaving people, because such a thing doesn't today exist, and maybe can, maybe can't, but nothing today can do that. So all the safety stuff really is like on lesser risks than that. You need to be really careful when you start walking down a path of like protecting everyone's safety. We actually live in a very safe world now, and I think people are maybe too safe. And they've developed this like sense of danger around them, or I should say, because we don't have many real dangers around us, we see dangers in things that aren't actually that dangerous, because our minds, evolved in a much more violent and dangerous environment. So we're too sensitive to things. You have actual people saying that like words are violence. Like, to me, that's just preposterous nonsense. I don't think words are ever violence. But if you think that, then of course you have to say, well, and then we need to protect people from words. And well, that's quite a can of worms to open.
Definitely. And if you see some of the traditional big tech employees and the worldview that they have, it can kind of disturb you in a way. I'm glad we have people such as yourself who are actually on the right side of history.
I'll say just a final point on safety. Like, I think the biggest risk to people of AI is actually like a totalitarian Orwellian surveillance handled by massive machine intelligence. This is obviously China's future, and I hope it's not America's future. And so, I consider Venice in some ways an AI safety company, because we are building a system that prevents or minimizes the risk of totalitarian surveillance.
Intellectual property question. So my understanding is that a lot of the AI tools, and we don't really know this, it's kind of a black box. There's a lot of controversy surrounding it, but something like ChatGPT, or not to name names, just some of the bigger models, they've been accused of basically sucking up the internet, right? Entire websites of artists and Reddit, but especially, for example, let's stick with the artists. There was a lawsuit by several artists who filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against Stability AI, Midjourney, and DeviantArt, claiming that these companies have infringed on the rights of millions of artists by training AI tools on 5 billion images scraped from the web without the consent of the original artists. I know somebody who thinks that there's basically a massive IP theft that's going on with even the text-based companies. What are your thoughts on the IP issue?
Yeah, very, very complicated and interesting issue. I have a lot of thoughts on IP generally. I think it's problematic in certain ways, but I will say that no one would think it's illegal or immoral for an artist to go peruse a bunch of images on a website and then train themselves to draw or paint in that style and produce work in that style. In fact, this is how all art works: is you look at other artists, you try to resemble good attributes of their technique, and that's a very human thing. Happens all the time with all forms of art, writing included.
You could say that that's how the human mind works, right? There's a theory of human learning that everything we know is just we've taken things that exist. We can't create actual original ideas. Everything is just a combination of everything we've already perceived, basically.
Yeah, although I think that's also flawed, because of course new things do emerge. So they're emerging from somewhere. I think the truth is that we replicate and copy constantly all the time. That's very much part of human nature. And occasionally we have new insights and original ideas. And it's that combination of frequent and common copying plus occasional new ideas that is where all of creation comes from. You could say it's even in our DNA. That's actually how DNA works, right? It usually is just copying, and occasionally there's a mutation. So you get originality through that process. If a person can look through a bunch of art and then resemble the technique and start producing it themselves, why does it become wrong when a machine does the same thing? What is the moral principle by which one is wrong and the other isn't? So I think there are fair points to debate in this area. I have a lot of trouble with IP generally, but I think reasonable people can disagree and debate on some of these points about what should be permissive with IP when it comes to machine intelligence. That's a worthy topic of debate.
Right, fair enough. And I only imagine some of the artists that I've put out of business. Well, not necessarily. I mean, that's a whole separate question, and that's not something I'm concerned with, is putting people out of business. It's more I'm interested in the IP question. I know somebody who says, for example, that the difference that you articulated is that no human would ever be able to just conglomerate all this knowledge. That's certainly a superhuman kind of intelligence that is sucking up all this data, and he sees that as, I guess, the difference, the distinction to be made. But
that's an interesting argument, because you could make back in the day before people had iPhones and maps, there were people who made money by being a guide who would take you through cities or through the mountains and the wilderness. You would pay people for that. Then these machines come along that figure out all of topology and can point you in any direction from your phone, because they can suck up all the information about the entire world, right? No human can do that. Should we be upset at that? I don't think so. I think that's an amazing new advancement. And just because it puts people out of work, that's rough for them. I get it. But there's no moral or ethical claim to prevent someone from building a better tool.
Yeah, that's fair. And to be clear, I'm not concerned about the putting people out of jobs argument. I certainly understand the libertarian perspective on that. Erik, On the topic of IP, who owns the final product, or who should own it?
In Venice's case, we just pass on all rights to ownership and control to the users. So if you're on Venice and you create an image, that image is yours. You can do whatever you want with it. I don't believe that's how things work on OpenAI. There's more complicated rules and restrictions on things. But yeah, with Venice, like you create it, it's yours, period.
On the topic of AI regulation, this is another thing that you have, I think, pretty courageously pushed back against. Of course, when people talk about regulation, they're talking about government regulation, which I think is one of the worst kinds of regulation. It is not unbiased. And the better forms of regulation come from regular people, the market, right? Upvotes on particular products. That's how darknet markets, so-called darknet markets work. It's just reputation based. That's all a form of regulation. But my question of, is there a point? Okay, obviously there's no Skynet right now, and will there ever be? Is another question. But this is certainly, let's say, a camel's nose under the tent with the current forms of AI, and there's a lot of money being invested in it. It's certainly going to continue to go. Can you ever see a point in some dystopian future where you say, hey, is there any red line crossed where you would say, hey, maybe it's time to pull the plug on this?
Well, pull the plug on this is a very simple metaphor. There's no this. AI is not one thing generated by one company that has a plug to be pulled. It's a wide, broad tapestry of interweaving technologies that are all changing, happening all over the world by different people and individuals and corporations for all sorts of different purposes. Super complicated. So it can't just be turned off. And if you try to turn off specific things, then you have to define what you want to turn off. And I think the good principle should be like, you shouldn't be able to hurt people or defraud people. These are like fundamental principles of good society. You can generate whatever you want, but if you're using it to harm someone, that should be a line. I think that's very reasonable. But that doesn't have anything to do with AI. You don't necessarily need new rules. You just need to enforce the basic ones, like don't hurt people, don't defraud others, and kind of keep it simple. Regulatory agencies don't like to keep it simple. They want more regulators and more jobs and more higher budgets. But honestly, if you just stick to the basics, you can get most of the way.
No, it's a fair response for sure. Let me slip in this hard privacy question, which I didn't cover earlier. I know that you, or in your terms, I believe you say you're not allowed to generate illegal things. Understandable. Does that mean that there is some kind of reporting of users that would occur? How exactly, if you see where I'm going, like how exactly does that?
We've actually changed those terms, and I don't think that line will exist in the new version. That was a little boilerplate, and it's funny you bring that up because, yeah, like a few weeks ago I saw that and I didn't like it. So I think that's been removed.
Right, and totally understandable. We live in the real world, but maybe the bigger question is are users ever reported, or is there simply nothing to report because you have no clue what people are prompting?
The latter. We have no clue what people are prompting.
Right, and I mean that's the only way to do it, frankly. I mean, because if you have something, somebody's going to demand it of you. That's just the reality of it. What is the advantage of running Venice versus, let's say, somebody has like a GPT for all or something like this on their own computer? I'm sure some people listening say, hey, I'm kind of already doing this stuff. Probably Venice is simply, it's on the browser. It's a lot more simple. You're using Venice's resources as opposed to your own. But what would you say? What's the advantage of Venice AI versus some of these already uncensored, locally run options?
If you know how to download and run good AI models on your own machine and you're comfortable doing that, great. I don't know that Venice is going to help you much. It's just much easier for the vast majority of people. And indeed, there are some models we run which I doubt can be run on a normal computer, like Llama 405B, 405 billion parameter model, will not run on any consumer device. Like you can't run it on a normal laptop. But if you have some kind of really tricked out system and you know what you're doing, then you could even run that. So it's really just a question of like making private and uncensored AI, useful for the 99% of the world that doesn't know how or doesn't want to spend time downloading and setting things up locally. But if you can do all that yourself, then all the power to you.
Very reasonable. Final question here. Would you ever consider training your own model of AI? And if you did, would it be openly trained?
We would consider it. We have no plans to do such a thing right now, but yeah, there might come a time when we're like, hey, we're in a good position to actually like train or fine tune models. That would open up a whole bunch of interesting questions on how to do it, but we don't have user data to do so. One thing we could do is like allow users to opt in so that like their answers could be trained on, and maybe they get compensated in some way or some kind of privilege, but that would always be like an optional thing that someone could go into. We would certainly never require it or force users to do such a thing. So yeah, we'll see if it ever makes sense. And if so, we'll explore it.
So this has been Erik Voorhees. Venice AI is the project we've been talking about. I like what I've heard. You can see he's very transparent. He's talking to us directly. That doesn't happen. That would not be happening with any of these other companies. I really appreciate that. As long as you are getting into AI, you may as well use one that is preserving your privacy and doing it in an uncensored way. So, Erik, I'm going to have all the links to Venice AI, some of your documents about your motivations for the company. We'll have some social media links. Is there any other place you'd like to send people, or any final thoughts?
No, I would just restate that like anyone can use it without an account. Just go to Venice AI and type in a prompt and see how it works. Hopefully you enjoy it. We're just a small team. Started this like 6 months ago, and if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it. It helps us build the products even better. So yeah, that's all. And I'm just glad that there are podcasts and talks that like discuss privacy so much. It's incredibly important. People do not give it enough attention.
Hey, thanks for listening. Look, I could use your help real quick. If you could share this, engage with me in some way, leave a review anywhere. This really helps me to break the technocratic shadow banning that is happening with my brand. And of course, if you really want to escape the technocracy, go to escapethetechnocracy.com. Privacy tutorial series, books, consulting, and of course, you can leave a donation. Thank you very much.